who will talk about the local and the exotic. Thank you. Actually, I'm probably not going to talk so much about the local. I'm going to talk more about the exotic. And I'm going to talk a lot about research projects that I've been running that are funded by the AHRC. So a lot of the work that I'm going to be telling you about is not just my work. I'm going to try and take as much credit for it as possible, but actually a lot of people have contributed to it. So I also want to start by saying that I am not a Romanist, okay? In fact, and I've been debating whether or not to admit this, I kind of hate you people, not you people. The reason for that is because what I do is I study human-animal environment interactions over the last 10,000 years, and to try and model, sort of find out cool stuff about the past, but also think about what implications it might have for the future. And I have to say that the Roman period is implicated in quite a lot of dicking around with nature. And so I'm going to be talking a bit about that today. Because I work on a lot of species through a lot of time periods, I'm going to focus on one site in particular, which is your kind of go-to exotic. If there's going to be crazy shit happening anywhere, it's going to be happening at Fishbourne Roman Palace. And of course, it's sort of trying to, as I'm not a Romanist, I didn't entirely get the brief, but I understand we're reflecting on like 50 years and what might happen in 50 years' time. That's what I'm going with. And I think that this is a great site for that, because the big excavations were happening about 50 years ago. We've got shiny things being discovered, but importantly, a huge amount of animal bones as well. And I think that there was great foresight in starting to work on this material. The stuff that Annie Grant did, I think, laid the foundations for zoo archaeology in this country, and we really have to acknowledge what this site has done for us. And also, not just for zoo archaeology at the time, but also for the next generation of zoo archaeologists. I saw that Martin is at the back. Martin, wave and shout, because no one can hear you. There we go. So Martin Allen started his career working at this site as well, and it's certainly done a lot for my career. Now, as I was saying, I didn't entirely get the brief. And I understand that there's like something about Britannia. So I quickly went onto the Wikipedia and I thought I'll find something. And actually there's like one article by this Dutch dude here on Wikipedia. So there, I've ticked the box, right? I've mentioned it. Anyone know this guy? Was he ever famous? Okay, well then this is a tribute to all those articles that have never been read in Britannia, because this appears to have been one of them. Nevertheless, box ticked. And let's talk then about what is interesting in looking at Exotica and why I'm interested in it. So this just shows for Britain, in a nice clip art way, the kinds of animal introductions that we've got brought to Britain. And we can see that actually there are really interesting reasons for looking at the Roman period, because there appear to be quite a lot of introductions in the late Iron Age through to the Roman period. And what I find interesting about this as well is how we perceive all of these animals. So, you know, there's very little in Britain today that is actually native, right? Most animals, our cattle, our sheep, our pigs, our horses, our chickens, everything's been introduced. And so long as it happened a long time ago, we can think of it as being part of our cultural heritage. You know, we like the Neolithic, we go to Stonehenge and we love cattle and sheep and pigs, part of our cultural heritage. And we like the Romans and everything that they introduced. We're going to go to Fishbourne Roman Palace and like that. Get to the present, the closer you are to the present, squirrels, grey squirrels coming over here, destroying all of our biodiversity. Is exactly the same rhetoric that we have for humans, and I kind of like working with animals for that reason. But we are also, of course, trying to find out cool stuff about the past. And so when you have these animal introductions, I mean, just looking where we've got our peaks, the Neolithic, we're pretty well connected to the continent at that point. Late Iron Age Roman, yeah, and again, and then in the medieval, nothing going on in the Anglo-Saxon period. Right? No one's connected to anything in that early Anglo-Saxon period. Nothing going on. So that's kind of fun, but we always, again, project, okay, so it's about trade, it's about economic, probably about diet, right? So they were all introduced for food. We always think of these things, but, you know, is that always the case? So I'm interested in when these animals came, why? Was it just for food? Are we convinced that we've got our dating right? And what is the bio and cultural impact of these introductions? Was it just that we all got tastier meals, or were there other things going on? So the book that I read, I'm not an anthropologist either, in fact I don't really know what I do anymore, but I read a lot of stuff. No, that's not true either, I read nothing, but I do get data. And so I was reading this book, skim reading, I read like the abstract or something, and I saw this
brilliant bit in there. So this is an anthropologist, Mary Helms, who's reviewed what she calls traditional societies, cross-cultural analysis. And she says, and I love this, is that in many of these traditional societies, there is an equation between geographical distance and supernatural distance. So if something has come from far, far away, it's seen as being really, really powerful, associated with gods and ancestors, and it's attributed with a lot of power. Within archaeology, a few people have picked up on this book and had the same ideas, and I've seen a lot of material culture specialists. I think I did a brief thing with Samian pottery. I don't like to talk about it, but during that time, I saw papers that were written where people were like, this Samian bowl, it had agency, and it transformed the way that people thought about the world, and it's like, wow, okay, people get that these objects from outer realms are powerful. But when it comes to animals, we're just like, nah, right, they're just meat, get over it. Whereas in fact, animals act back. We're attributing agency to pots. But with animals that spend most of their time interacting with us alive rather than dead, you say to them, hey, chicken, come over here. And the chicken goes, no, and runs off in the other direction, right? So animals act back. They do actually change your behavior. So is it possible that all these animals that are being brought in are more than just meat and are doing something interesting? So I'm going to touch briefly on the chickens. It's already been introduced, which is fantastic. So in terms of the chicken, it's very clear to me from the work that we've been doing on this project that when they're first introduced, which is in the Iron Age, so the Romans have got naught to do with this, they're not really eaten. We can tell that when we look at their representation in iconography, so they're on coins, very different to how we perceive them today, where they're just comedy chickens and their bones are strewn around on the streets. When we go to the Iron Age, when they're first introduced, they're buried in little pots. Not because they were being cooked in little pots, but because people were being buried in little pots at that time. So they're being seen as people, and they lived really, really long lives at this point. So totally different situation, but I think it's good for us to stop projecting how we see stuff straight back onto the past and using that as interpretation, because if we do something richer, we can get a richer explanation back. So what I tend to do, I am trained as a zooarchaeologist and I use a lot of zooarchaeological data, but if we're trying to understand culture is a messy thing. And it's a bit like if you're writing an essay and your question is culture, discuss. If you read one book, it's going to be a rubbish answer. And I feel the same is true with anything that we do. So I can get some good stuff from bones, but why not look at material culture and iconography and then throw all the sciences at it as well? So I try to do everything that I can with the bigger team, right? And as I said, I'm trying to take credit for everything, but actually a lot of people doing genetics, isotopes on this stuff. So squeezing all the information that we can to try and understand this human-animal environment relationship and then try and get perhaps richer interpretations. So I'm going to start off talking about the fallow deer, which is a species that I really kind of kicked off my career with, particularly working at Fishbourne Roman Palace. I'm going to give you a bit of background about this deer species, right? Up until the last ice age, fallow deer were everywhere in northern Europe, and then about 20,000 years ago, a big lump of ice lands on top of northern Europe, and all of these deer just run away and hide down where it's nice and warm, because they're a warm-loving species, down and where we thought was Anatolia, that was their glacial refuge. That was what we thought. So I'm going to now do a sort of idiot's guide, because I'm not a geneticist either, but I use genetic data, and take you through what then happened, a quick run through 10,000 years of fallow deer. So we knew that we had this glacial refugia here of the European fallow deer, and I've coloured those ones blue. But there's another species of fallow deer called the Mesopotamian fallow deer, which I've coloured in purple. Now, as soon as we're into the Neolithic period, these deer start to be hopped onto islands. So the Persian fallow deer goes over to Cyprus, and then other fallow deer are taken all around Greece and the Greek islands. But you'll see that these deer that we've got and the genetic work that we've done on those are red. They're not blue. So that means that we've got another glacial refugia population, which we think is now in the Balkans. And it seems to be this group that then, through time, not much happens until we get to the Roman period, starts to turn up everywhere, right? Across northern Europe. And then this one, I just want to point this out, we've got bizarrely Persian fallow deer rocking up on Mallorca, which is bizarre, sort of, whoa, no one was expecting that. So that one's really, really fun. But the question then has to be, right, just because we've got the bones turning up, does that actually mean that these animals are living and breeding? Because in the Roman period in particular, there was a pretty healthy trade in body parts. and skins, whether it was for medicine or relics. So we find lots of shed antlers. This is a foot bone that's been turned into a medical implement. And then these guys were recovered, these again, foot bones recovered from the temple to Diana. And that was in Augst in Switzerland. Augst, okay. And I think there we've got a real association with fallow deer and the goddess Diana. So we always tend to see these associations again with the exotica being linked to gods and goddesses. So we can't be confident then that when we find these body parts that they're actually evidence for the living animals. Except when we went back through the fishbone assemblage, we didn't find the normal sort of distribution that we would expect of shed antlers and foot bones. We found like meat-bearing bits, and in particular we found jaws, which made us think, okay, this might be a living breeding population. With the jaws, we were able to do strontium isotope analysis. And I'm going to assume a certain level of knowledge, but just very quickly, all isotope analysis is based on the concept that you are what you eat. So whatever you eat gets taken into your body and becomes the building blocks of your bones, your teeth, your hair. And strontium is linked to geology and what water you've been drinking and how it's come through the geology. So fishbone being down here, if you analyse the bones or the teeth in particular, it ought to come back with a result that's in this area here, right? If it was living and dying at fishbone. So we did this jaw, we radiocarbon dated it, we did another one as well, also radiocarbon dated both to the 1st century AD. And we took samples from teeth that form at different stages in an animal's life. So we took a sample from the M1, which forms around less than 4 months of age, and it comes back in yellow here, which is not the fishbone region, right? So this could just be an animal that's been imported as a body part, except when we look at the M2 and the M3, so these are teeth that form later in life, the M3 is the animal equivalent of the wisdom tooth, we see that this animal has gone from somewhere yellow to somewhere green, okay? It's been moving, but appears to end up somewhere that could be fishbone. The next question is, okay, well, where's this yellow one come from? It could have been, say, it could have come from Wales. There could have been a big population of fallow deer in Wales. There weren't, but there could have been. So how do we get around this and show for sure that we've got a first-generation import that arrives from somewhere else and then lives out the rest of its life at fishbone? Well, we can do different isotope analysis. We can do oxygen, which is links more into temperature. But there is no baseline for this. So you know how I had that lovely map showing, well, it could have been here. Well, there is none of those data. So we've had to create that based on modern and archaeological populations, and that's all down to my colleague, Holly Miller. And what I'm able to show you here is that cold climates give you this kind of area. Temperate climates give you this green band, and we can see that that M3, the one that gave us the fishbone signature, plots in lovely temperate deer regions. But that M1 plots in with all the hot countries. So this is an animal that came from somewhere very, very warm and then came to fishbone where it lived out the rest of its life. And the other jaw that we have from the site, dated slightly later, is all consistent with fishbone. So we've got first generation imports that then established a breeding population. Super cool. And this almost then starts to tell us, right, why they were introduced. Because they're moving when they're really young, right? They're so cute. Oh, they're so fluffy. Why would you not be taking these everywhere? They're adorable. And we know even from the text, right, that Sylvia had, is it from Virgil's, what is that? Enid? Is talking about how she had a pet deer that was taken and captured whilst it was a fawn and then kept within a park. And that then makes you think, oh yeah, right, parks. Because if you've gone, right, to the effort of bringing a tiny fallow deer all the way from far, far away, somewhere warm, and you bring it to fishbone, you're not going to go, run, be free, you know, enjoy yourself. No, you're going to go, that's my deer, I'm putting it in a park and building. And that's like mental, right? Because the concept of parks is not a normal thing to want to put wild stuff in a park. It's a very particular worldview. But we do have other texts that even name-check fallow deer, although Will Bowden, is he here, Will? Yeah. Okay. You don't think necessarily it's fallow deer that they're talking about? Okay, good. He's not a Romanist either, by the way. But they name-check fallow deer, and they say, look, yeah, if you want to have a park, put fallow deer in it, boom, you've got pleasure and enhancement. But it really does represent, I think, a new ideology being represented, this concept that you are sort of trying to domesticate the wild and bring it to order. And I do want to talk about Will Bowden. He's the one who gave me this brilliant line, which is that really these parks are a vocabulary of power that demonstrate power over the natural world and power over other people as well. I really, really like that. So when we first started doing this, we were like, cool, we've nailed this with the fallow deer, that by looking at these results, we're able to say that there is a park. And I think to that we can now add the brown hare. We're finding lots and lots of brown hare. We've got a new project studying brown hare. And we went to the site, going through all the archives, and I'm pretty confident that we've now got rabbit as well. So I really didn't think that there would be any Roman rabbits. I think maybe there are, and I think we've got them at Fishbourne because, of course, we have everything mad is at Fishbourne, including crazy exotic chickens. So this is really cool. We know that the Romans did not introduce the chicken, right? People have been eating chickens and eggs before we get huge numbers in the Roman period. So we thought that the subject was dead, but of course people don't introduce things once. They do it lots and lots of times. And as we were doing the genetics of chickens everywhere throughout time, right, we found that across the whole of Europe, throughout time, we've got nothing other than clade E, right, which is just Europe, nothing else, except, of course, at Fishbourne. Nowhere else, like across the whole of Europe, have we got anything else. But at Fishbourne, yes, we have E, but we also have clade D and clade C. And for your information, clade D and clade C are India and Southeast Asia, right? These are unique. And I shouldn't be doing any of this because this is like not published data, and I shouldn't really be getting this filmed at all, but you people are worth it. You need to know this knowledge. So this is insane because it then gives us, all right, so this is, they clearly don't endure. So these are just a few examples of mad chickens that have been sent. And it's started me thinking, it's like really Queen Victoria, who had like fancy fowl and was bringing all of these crazy chickens, and they were being gifted to her. And even today, right, that we've got like fancy fowl magazines. It's that same sort of thing, I think, that we're seeing in the Roman period at Fishbourne. And of course it is because it's mental. But do all of these things then endure? And so this is just zooarchaeological representation of all these three taxa. So your fallow deer, your chickens, and your hares. And you can see how the populations kind of increase, but as soon as we get to this early Anglo-Saxon period, there is a big crash. And so I'm thinking, what is this? Is this just because, again, in the early Anglo-Saxon period, nobody's doing anything? They're just like cow, sheep, pig, that's all, and they're not being represented? Or are they genuinely gone and then get reintroduced? Well, we haven't done the work with the chickens and the hares yet, but with the fallow deer, I can now tell you that, yeah, the Roman fallow deer that get introduced, they go away. They go home, and they're all extinct. And so we've radiocarbon dated, done all the genetics. The red ones are Roman. We've then got a 500-year gap before we get another introduction, around 1000 AD, and those are the ones that endure to the present. So I suspect that we're going to see a similar situation with rabbits, with hares, with chickens. I would throw into that rats, a whole load of other taxa. I think that when the Romans go away, something happens and all of these do. It might be a climate thing because quite a lot of these are warm-loving species. So to that extent, the Romans didn't have that much of a legacy in Britain in terms of biodiversity, with one exception. And these are super cool results, like super cool. So do you know about cats? Do you know about the story of cats and how, I was trying to find some images. We've got early cats apparently at Gussage All Saints. When I googled that, I just got this weird website where people are selling Bengal cats and kittens. But at Gussage All Saints, this is very topical, right? Because everyone's like, oh, all right, down in Iron Age Dorset, we've got all the first cats that are being introduced because we've got all these kittens and they're all found in associated bone groups. And so, yeah, that late Iron Age, we've got cats. They're all being domesticated. Jobs are good. Except we've just done the genetics and a whole range of things on that. And let me just give you a bit of background about cats, because I'm not sure if you know that we've got, in Europe, our native cat is the European wild cat, right? Now very endangered, just in Scotland. Everywhere else, we've got this Libica, and it's actually this one that all domestic cats descend from, right? So none of our cats come from the wild cat. They're all the Felis sylvestris, which is a Near Eastern cat. And to prove it, I recently dug up my own cat, Waggers, and submitted him for genetic analysis. And he is indeed Felis libica. Really good preservation. It's absolutely fantastic. So we've done a time core. He's the one cat that I actually like, right? But a dead one. No, that's horrible. So we have recently done a very cheap pilot study of doing the genetics of cats time core through Britain. And we would expect, right, that if these all of these Iron Age cats are domestic cats, they have to be Felis libica, right? Because they will be domestic and therefore introduced. Nope. The cats that we've been looking at aren't libica. They are European wildcat, which blows apart everything in terms of questions of domestication. Does it suggest that we actually have an independent yet unsuccessful domestication of the wildcat in the Iron Age? Because all the contextual evidence looks like these are domestic kitteny cats, but they're wildcat. So that's one issue. The second issue is that it tells us about the distribution of wildcat in Iron Age and Roman Britain, which is they were everywhere. And today they are restricted to Scotland. And what we see with all of our other cats, that as soon as you get into the Roman period, you've got nothing but libica. So we've done Will Bowden's Caister site, we've done cats from all over the place, nothing but libica as soon as you're into the Roman period. So generally I'm saying, like, the Romans weren't responsible for everything, but I think that they might have been responsible for the introduction of the domestic cat, which then knocked out all of the European wildcat and has been doing so systematically for the last couple of thousand years. So to bring this to a conclusion then, the animals that we are looking at, right, all of these exotica, they are about more than just food. It's gods and it's power. And I think that they changed human behaviour because they changed the way that we thought about the natural world, and then they changed how that natural world looked in terms of the landscape, whether it's parks or whether it's how they've impacted upon other animals. Most of the Roman ones did not leave a legacy, but I think the Romans might be responsible for what I consider to be one of the biggest ecological disasters on the planet, which is the domestic cat. As much as I loved Waggers, I just think domestic cats are an abomination. They're so cute and furry, but they just kill so much stuff, and they wee in my house. We're doing more work on domestic cats. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, we went and gathered more samples from Fishbourne Roman Palace, where it looks like there are wild cats, but also domestic cats. And the fact that we were able to do that speaks volumes about that site and about Roman archaeology. That site was excavated 50 years ago, but the fact that we're able to go and keep working on it now is amazing. And I kind of want to acknowledge these men, these three bearded men. Barry Cunliffe for thinking that it was a good idea to even look at animal bones and hiring Annie Grant to do it. John Manley for taking the bold decision not to discard them all when there was pressure. And then my friend Rob Simmons, who is now the curator there and forces me to do ridiculous amounts of paperwork every time I want to sample anything. I hate him for it, but he's thinking about the next 50 years. These three men were visionary in terms of zoo archaeology, and they were thinking about the future as much as they were thinking about the past. That's what I think we need to do. And what I also love about them, I missed your introduction, but I hear that you were just like, men, Romanist men. Well, these Romanist men have done all the hard work so that I can swan in, apply to the AHRC, extract huge amounts of cash to do incredible things, find out cool stuff about the past, make the world a better place as we move into the future. Thank you.
Questions? Can I just ask one really quick one about deer and transporting? I imagine that they could be quite skittish.
Sorry, can I have the facts?
Where they have a deer as a bridle, don't they?
Where?
Okay, I'll find it for you. But there
Did
is
you
one.
did you dream it?
No.
Wow.
No.
I mean, that sounds like an amazing...
Because I would have thought they don't want to go onto a boat.
So the thing about the fallow deer is actually its name descends from the Persian dama, which means tame. Right. So it's a very biddable species, and also when they're little, they'll just curl up and look cute, and you can do whatever, take them anywhere. so that's not a problem.
I'll find the bride.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sorry to interrupt again, but yes, fascinating. Cats. It's not only Gustage All Saints. Whitcomb Iron Age settlement. There are kittens from a pit there, identified by Christopher Buckland Wright back in the 70s. So it may be another useful sample for you to look at. Yes.
That one, I would like to take notes of that one. We have got other Iron Age sites. I just used Gustage All Saints because actually I'm lying about my results. It wasn't that site, but it might as well have been, and I'm confident that it will be. It's a lot of other Iron Age sites. It's just that these data are so cool, I won't be able to publish them if I hadn't lied like a tiny bit. The fact remains that it's true, but this site is one that I'm not aware of, which is cool. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Just a question about that kind of Saxon species apocalypse. Is there not quite a big change in the range of context-bearing animal bone in that period, or that might account for that change?
So there is a big shift. I don't think it's a big enough shift to explain it all. So you're right. And I think also with the genetics that it proves that we have got that. And I'm pretty convinced that we're going to have something similar. One thing I didn't talk about with the chickens is that we've got something really interesting happening with their genetics as well, around 1000 AD, but I think it links to an earlier population, decimation. So I don't think it wipes out the chickens, but I think it contracts their populations to an extent that there's actually a genetic shift. But I really want to explore that shift because I want to know if it's cultural context, actually true, or environmental, or it's just opening up so many questions for me. And only because I'm now able to model all these species against each other, whereas before it was just like, an interesting thing happened there. But when you see it repeated, and with plants too. So I think, there's something worth exploring.
Okay, I think we'll leave it there and break for coffee.